we have chronicled this many times before. Slow start, hit our stride, crash and burn.
Yeah. And Jeff always knows it's about to happen, and you and I are like, no, we got more. We got more in us, and then we're like, oh, Jeff was right, we're done.
Yeah. Although this time Jeff wants to stretch it out a little bit.
I do.
Do you really?
Well, just because we're covering so much.
Yeah, but we've said a lot.
We've said a lot of words.
We've said all the words.
And so anyway, today we're going to do 46, 47,
Go ahead.
48, and 49.
49. And this is, am I right, our 100th episode?
No.
Was that last week?
No. We have a couple more.
Oh, okay.
So like either sometime this summer, we have like three, the third one from now is our 100th episode. So this is 98. 99.
8.
Yep. Math. So we're going to hit 100 soon, and we'll have to figure out what we're going to do. But anyway.
What are we going to do?
I don't know.
Can I have fajitas again? Last week we recorded a really good episode post fajitas.
Yeah,
I feel like that should be our new normal.
Yeah, the new normal.
We can do that.
Fajitas and Theology podcast. We can get on board with that. Yeah. So we're in a season, and we're nearing the end, and it's been the life of Joseph, the highs and lows of life of Joseph. And so today we are going to try to tackle these. It might be a little bit longer of an episode, but we'll see how this goes. So we've got this episode and then the culmination episode, which will be chapter 50 and sort of just our overall thoughts on the life of Joseph and the past season as well. So if you have questions or things that you've had over the time of listening to the series, we would love to hear those.
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
That's true, because we are moving on from Joseph. We love him, but bye-bye. So chapter 46, really interesting. This whole swath of scripture here is just really good because we just have this, the message got back to Jacob, and Jacob is now picking up and leaving and headed to Egypt for safety. I mean, really, I think what really stands out about this movement from where they are to moving to Egypt is this must happen for the survival of Jacob, his line, and God's promise. I mean, that's a big deal.
And we'll find out for the nation of Egypt.
Yeah, right.
Like,
right.
Joseph takes care of them too. But anyway, that's later.
No, I mean, that's the whole thing. Is
that's
like
the backdrop of everything.
That's the whole backdrop of everything. Is that these 70 people that we find out it's 70 people coming from Jacob's family eventually turns into the nation where in Exodus chapter 1, it's 180,000.
Right.
You know, in this growth over these couple hundred years in the land of Egypt. And so, it's a huge thing that's going down in these chapters right now. And it's really interesting because 46 starts with God coming to Jacob in a vision. And in verse 2, it says, and God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said to Jacob, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. And I think, I read that because I just think there's lots of, there's covenant language, and then there's just a reminder of his presence. Yeah. And then obviously the comfort, which is a big thing for Jacob way back when he wanted to die after Joseph died, was, hey, your son Joseph's there, and he's going to be there with you. So.
Yeah, there's so much there. I think the first thing that stuck out to me was it said he set out with all that he had. He set out with all that he had.
Yeah.
That's a lot in one tiny little bit of language.
Yeah, right.
This wasn't just like he decided to go see his son on a trip.
Yeah.
This was picking up everything he had ever known.
Yeah. Which kind of calls back to the call of Abraham. It's
100%.
Like, everybody, everything, and go to the land that I will show you, kind of thing.
Yeah. And really, I mean, I know that there was a lot of context prior to this, but this does show a sign in Jacob's turn in his life, right? I mean, we're going to see some, maybe not repentant language.
He's a little back and forth.
He is, but like he's
still Jacob.
Yeah, he's still Jacob, but like it probably took a lot. I mean, just imagine like that's a thing, right? When like your parents age and then they have to move from the house they raised their children in.
This is a guy that does not like discomfort.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we've kind of seen that
that's right.
play out through his life. And
Yeah. So this is probably really, really uncomfortable. And so that's what's so beautiful about God coming to Jacob in this vision in this way. And so he sets out and he goes, and then as they go, I think it's kind of cool that Moses included this genealogy. And in a lot of genealogies, they'll highlight the men that carry forth the genealogy. And so really it goes through the tribes, the eventual tribes for them. And so it counts them all up. And then, you go through chapter 46 and it's just listing out and the different, moms from these different children of the tribes. And then you get to chapter 46, verse 27 with the, totaling up into 70 people that end up coming. So then, finally, we have the moment we've been waiting for, which is Jacob for the first time seeing his son Joseph. And so there's this big, reunion that takes place. And I don't know, it's a sweet moment, right? You guys have anything on kind of this reunion before we get into kind of the plan Joseph devises?
I mean, it's emotional. We've talked about that last week. It's just about Joseph's emotions and how much sometimes we discount the fact that these are human beings.
Yeah.
These are actual people. We're seeing snapshots of it, but as we talked about last week, this was years and years and years later.
Yeah.
Years and years later, and Jacob, I love it, verse 30, Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know you're still alive." Like, there's a couple ways you can take that. One is this sense of relief, whatever, or it's, I don't want it to get bad again, so let's just go ahead and take me out now.
This is the best it's going to get.
With him, you just don't know.
Yeah. Well, and it continues in 47, 48, 49, where he's like kind of, even when he talks to Pharaoh in a little bit, it's like he wants to go.
Yeah.
And then he's still not. He's still there. So, anyway, so it's pretty interesting. And we'll pick up on that theme a little bit later. Here's what I love. As they come in, the family comes in, the 70 of them are looking to settle. Joseph is really always scheming. He's always thinking. We see that here. We've seen it before with him kind of devising the plan about the years of famine, the years of plenty, then the years of famine. And here, as the family comes, he's got a plan already. He's just
preparing the way. Yeah. When you say scheming, that can sound negative.
Negative connotation.
Yeah, it is
always
a negative
thinking.
thing. Yeah,
always thinking. And so
we talked about that.
Strategizing is probably a better word.
That Joseph was shrewd.
Yeah, very. A lot of wisdom.
Yeah, in a good way.
Yeah, he knows how things work.
Right.
He knows how to set the table.
Yeah,
right.
For sure. And so in that, he kind of devises this plan for, as they come together, for his family to be the shepherds in the land of Goshen, which was a fruitful land, a plentiful land, and it was separated from the Egyptians. He makes a comment in there that the Egyptians don't like shepherds. And so a couple things are happening here. Joseph would know, since Egyptians don't like shepherds or look down on shepherds, that there wouldn't be enough to take care of the flocks that need to be taken care of, especially Pharaoh's flocks. So they would be a favored people,
right,
because they have this responsibility to go do this. What are the things that you have there? I think it guarantees them the land. It was kind of like when they went there, they kind of laid claim on it, because it was a kind of a desolate area. Not many Egyptians were there, and so they kind of got to lay claim on it.
Yeah.
And then by the time Pharaoh came, it was like, well, you guys are already here, so you can have the land.
Yeah, and one of those things I found on the idea of shepherds, sheep being an abomination had more to do with the fact that there wasn't a lot of vegetation or farmable land in Egypt, so it was more of it wasn't a religious thing necessarily.
It wasn't helpful.
Like we would think about it. It's just like, that's not, exactly. It's not helpful for those sheep to be here, so put them somewhere where they can survive and we can survive.
Yeah.
Right.
And Goshen was one of the few places in Egypt where sheep could survive.
Yeah.
Because it was up next to the border of the Nile. It was a little more fertile there. One of the things that y'all are going to have to talk me through next week when we kind of do our wrap-up of all of this is, I keep not liking Jacob. In every single chapter, there's something where I'm like, why did I not notice this before? And maybe I'm just reading my own tone into it, but 47:9 cracks me up. So Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life.
Totally. Yeah.
Nor have they attained the years that my father did during the day." I'm like, oh, come on.
Yeah, so Lori, the section you kind of want to there is this interaction between Pharaoh. So it's after Joseph devises the plan.
Right.
And then now there's an interaction with Jacob and and Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh's basically like, hey, how long you live? And he goes, oh, let me tell you.
Right.
Let me tell you how long I've lived. Yeah.
My daddy and granddaddy had pretty good.
My days have been.
Yeah. No, there's a lot there. And I think, he's definitely complaining. He's definitely has a whiny tone a lot. Anything that happens, and I think we've talked about this too, and I think it's really important. This is when, if we're not careful and we become the center of the story.
Yeah.
And forgetting, and when you compare and contrast that to the life of Joseph always was like crediting the Lord.
Yeah.
He was always mindful and conscious of the Lord leading his life. Yeah. And so even in the way they endured and handled their suffering.
Yeah. Pit, prison, palace, Joseph is the same.
Yeah.
Right?
He never talks about his circumstances, ever. And yet, Jacob is just as much a part of God's plan as Joseph.
Yeah. Now,
as Joseph is.
Before we trash Jacob too much, I mean, you do look back at his life, and it was hard. I think the difference is that this is what's interesting too. So I think in Joseph's life, things happened to Joseph. In Jacob's life, he dug his own metaphorical grave.
Consequences, yeah.
So there's all the consequences. So he really did live a not great life, but a lot of it was because of him.
Right.
And so it's just fascinating too. I think what we can do is, if we're not careful, we can attribute things that we have done, bad decisions we have made, and attribute to God. And we never saw Joseph point a finger at God. Right. Which is interesting.
And the thing we see that's consistent with God, though, is he allows each man to go through whatever they need to go through to become who God intends for them to be, right? For the purpose of God's plan, not their own.
Yeah, totally.
Right? It's like their story is always secondary to what God's doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really appreciate you two in that. I am quick when I'm studying to jump to personal people application, and you guys are really good to say, well, let's first start with what God is doing, what God is intended.
Because you're a preacher.
yeah. And so I really appreciate it.
That's where I struggle a lot of times, is getting to how this matters for me or someone I know, because there is so much on the page to dig into that a lot of times you forget to actually bring it home.
Yeah, that's good. I wrote down, you cannot manipulate God's blessing. I feel like Jacob got in trouble because he tried to manipulate the Lord's blessing. And then Joseph never tried. And then the Lord received. And
it even started going back to wanting to get his father's blessing, and it wasn't his to have. It all goes back to him trying to work a situation. It's just consistent throughout his life.
But for sure. It says that Jacob blessed. It's interesting, blessed Pharaoh. It's probably more of a greeting. I don't know if there was this very... Is it sanctimonious the right way? I mean, it wasn't this huge big moment. I think it was just more of a...
I actually found some interesting commentary on it that would have been an indicator of he is the elder statesman. Even though it's not his country, there's still an age thing. There is a patriarch thing, especially in their society. He was the father of a
burgeoning
band of people, or I guess large band of people that had all basically come from him. So there is a kind of a rank and file happening here a little bit. That Pharaoh apparently acknowledged, because he didn't refuse the blessing.
Didn't push back.
Yeah, that's good. The next part of chapter 47 is really about Joseph and the famine. And again, it's Joseph exercising wisdom, gift given by God through the famine to help the people get through the famine. I think we're not going to cover too much detail here, but we talked about this earlier. Joseph was... his responsibility was to Pharaoh, and making sure that Pharaoh was taken advantage of. And Lori, you actually mentioned this too when we were kind of prepping, was like, whoa, this sounds kind of negative. How have we kind of worked? I think if a casual reader were going through this and you're reading it, you're like, oh my goodness, did he just make them indentured slaves, or what's going on here?
Because there's a lot of language about that they ran out of food, and so he took their livestock in exchange for food, which doesn't seem like a fair exchange if we're talking about sort of our American concept of fairness. And then he eventually makes them pay a fifth of everything that they do make because they were allowed to stay where they were for free, and so then they have to pay it back. I mean, there's a lot of things there that made me go, gosh, what is happening here? But I'll let Jeff make his really good point, because it was a really good point, which was who Joseph's
loyalty
his
and responsibility.
earthly loyalty was to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's this little thing in verse 26 that Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day. So the writer is saying that at the time of this writing, this is still in effect, that Pharaoh, who would have been a god to the people, should have the fifth.
Right.
Well, what did the nation of Israel need to give their God? A tenth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's like if I think the original readers would have gone, wow, our God's really generous.
Right.
Like he doesn't require near as much of us as Pharaoh did from his people.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
reading it
huge.
with this very Western eye.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, and in verse 25, the people said to Joseph, "You have saved our lives. May it please my Lord, we will be servants to Pharaoh." They were grateful for anything.
Yeah.
And so the fact that there was any exchange
Anything's better
going
than starving
on,
to death.
was that?
Anything's better than starving
Yeah,
to death.
for sure,
You know?
for sure. And so it really, I don't think, is Joseph dealing in a cruel way with people. It was a exercise of wisdom.
Yeah,
on
because
keeping
once
a
this is
nation
all over
surviving.
the nation, because he knows this is only going 7 years. God
Right.
told him that. So at the end of that 7 years, the nation still has to be able to survive.
Right.
And it can't be broke because it just handed stuff out
Yep.
for 7 years.
Yep.
Hey, listen, we are making great pace because we're at the end of 47, about to enter 48. Okay, all right. So
I've been going an hour and a half.
a lot of editing in this one.
We're,
No, just
we're
kidding.
about to get to the point where Jacob says he's going to die again.
Again, and it won't be the last
It
time.
will not be the last time.
And so, but one thing before we get to that is in verse 27, it talks about thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. It's just interesting the contrast.
Yep.
Because we know what's coming next with them, Egypt then becoming the world power, and then Israel becoming enslaved to them. But right now, Israel's living quite nicely over there in Goshen, while Egypt is clearly suffering, which is what most 47 is talking about.
Yeah, one thing I did to kind of prep for this was go back and listen to, so back in 2013, 2014, Brad preached through the entire book of Genesis and listened through to these chapters. And he made a great observation that that Jacob had Joseph for the first 17 years of Joseph's life, and then they had each other for the last 17 years of his life.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Like I totally
it.
missed that little book in there, but I don't think those numbers are there just for
That's right.
curiosity's sake.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
on purpose.
No, that's
Yeah,
cool.
that's really good.
Go, Brad.
Look at
Go,
that.
Brad,
That is
look
pretty
at
cool.
that.
Yeah. Okay, verse 29. So it drew near that time that Israel must die, and he called his son Joseph, and they have this kind of interaction and this kind of commitment that he says there. Yeah, go ahead.
But also, poor Jacob, he wanted to die 17 years ago. Now he's 147.
I know, right?
No, that's, yeah,
mean,
yeah. Just keeps on going.
You know what I was thinking? Is
yeah.
this might be weird and off topic, but so
That's what we do here.
just
Lori.
what we do here. Jacob says, don't leave me here,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
take me with you when you go. That's kind of what happens at the end of 47. And I just thought, like, what are the Egyptians super famous for? Like, what do we think of when we think of Egypt? We think of mummies, pyramids, right? Like, he was in the perfect place to be making this, hey, take me with you when you go. And Joseph kind of the same.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's not going to be a bag of bones. Like, they embalm him.
Yeah,
Like, he
right.
really does get to go
Yeah.
to the land of promise
Yeah.
when they go. And it's such a sweet, again, just one of those kind of strange, and maybe I'm stretching it, but I think it's kind of a cool provision. That was important to him, to get to be buried in the land of his fathers. And again, because he was in Egypt, which is God's provision for them, even though it was a scary place.
Yeah. I think it's interesting on that note, like recognizing God's provision. So like Jacob found it to be important to ask for that. For as wavering as he was.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that speaks to, again, that both sides of Jacob thing. Because,
right.
I mean, we don't get
Yep.
to this until the end of 49, but, that his desire to be buried with his grandfather, with his father,
Yep.
with his family, that actually is a statement of faith.
I
Yeah,
agree.
Right.
So it isn't just like I would want to be buried near my family.
That's right.
It isn't that.
No.
It's God promised
sure.
to do something, and I'm still a part of that promise, even
Yeah.
after I'm gone.
Yep.
That's right.
And
You know?
the fact that we hear it 3 different times. I mean, I'm joking
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he keeps saying it's time to die, and he just never dies. But I think it is so important to remember that he's believing. He's believing
Yeah.
what God said about a great nation coming from him.
Yeah.
Knowing that he had to move to Egypt, because if he doesn't, he's going to die back there. He's got to leave.
I love too that, like, we're talking about Jacob and like he still believes, but then he doubts. Is like he sees like it all unfolding. So it's like he. You know, we often say, I just need to see more. I need to see more. And like God continued to provide and let him see more. And he still wrestled, you know. And I think that's quite the snapshot for all of us. You know, we think we need to see more. And man, he shows us so much of his blessing and his goodness.
Well, and in the New Testament, that would be called, I believe, help my unbelief. Right?
For sure.
And you turn over to Hebrews, and it's all about, you know, the promise that wasn't fulfilled. That's what their faith was in, is what God was doing. So, I mean, it's just a great picture of everything.
Yeah, that's good. Chapter 48, now we get into these next two chapters, which is Jacob. It's basically, essentially doling out kind of his last will testament, kind of like, okay, here's, we got to take care of some family business before I go. One of the things I wrote down in my notes, really interesting. So, you know, we got these family TV shows that are really big right now. So Yellowstone and Succession and other that are just like really tough, kind of like, I want to see a show on this story. Even the background as we get into like the son's blessings and the things that they did early in Genesis.
I'm not going to lie. You said family shows, and I'm like, you watch those shows with your family?
No.
And then I realized you were saying they're about just families.
Cruel, nasty, like drama. And these are the most popular shows on TV right now. And it's like, we got it right here in the Bible.
Because we relate to it.
Yeah, we'll relate to it. And, And so chapter 48, there's this interaction between Joseph and Jacob. And so they have this discussion about Ephraim and Manasseh, about sort of giving Joseph that double blessing. It really was a blessing to Joseph even more than it was a blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh. I mean, it was to show his gratitude and gratefulness towards Joseph. And so if you were looking to like kind of bucket this, it's the double blessing from Jacob to Joseph, that they would, and that's where we talked about previously, is that there wouldn't be a quote unquote tribe of Joseph, but there'd be two of them, which is the sons. And so there's sort of an adoption taking place here for Jacob, treating him as his own sons. All right.
And I did have a thought where it was like, it also doubly blessed Joseph because he got to watch his kids be doubly blessed. I mean, there's a little parenting thing there where you kind of go, I get that. There's not a tribe of Joseph. But that's even better for Joseph because it's his kids.
Yeah, totally. Well, this is interesting, though, in verse 17, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right, because there was this whole thing where...
Right, that's going to happen in the switchy thing.
So when Jacob is blessing the kids, it's customary for the older to be blessed and the younger really not to get anything. That's even the whole thing of blessing all the kids, blessing and cursing all the kids is a bit extra from what you would typically see. But he... crosses his hand so that his right hand, which would have been the hand of blessing, is on the younger. Well, we see that, you know, every time this happens pretty much throughout all the patriarchs. But so one time that I can remember that it says that Joseph was displeased about something. Like that's the one time we see him, in his mind, there was something that's supposed to happen that didn't. And it had to do with his dad. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. Well, and also, too, because if you would, I mean, we just talked about this earlier, but he was such a strategist. He had everything probably mapped out.
Well, yeah, because
he was a planner.
because it says, because his father's eyesight had grown dim. So he arranged the boys with the older on Jacob's right hand, and Jacob crossed his hands. So it's just like, wow. It's just a lot there.
Totally. No, that is really good. And so, I mean, there was Shem over Japheth, there was Isaac over Ishmael, and there's Jacob over Esau. And here we kind of have that as well, kind of playing out, which is really
Do you think that is a picture of us as Gentiles being grafted in? Like that it's not always,
you know what I mean? You could make a case for that,
That it's a picture of, it doesn't, there's not only one way. God provides the way God provides, and he chooses how he chooses. And the blessing's going to come through who the blessing's going to come through. Because if you think about it, Manasseh and Ephraim are children of Egyptians.
That's good.
Their mom is not even a Hebrew. Right? Because
that's true.
So it's just, to me, we just keep seeing layer upon layer upon layer
it's a really good
of God
insight.
saying that the gospel, this salvation is for everybody.
Yeah.
It's not going to necessarily just go the one way.
Yeah, and you use that word adoption. Just this pictures that Jacob is basically saying, these are my sons.
That's right.
Right.
He actually says, just as Reuben and Simeon are my sons.
That's right. Yeah.
These are my sons.
Yeah. So it's a great picture of the gospel.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Wow.
And just to make sure I hit on something that Lori has said previously, verse 21 of chapter 48, then Israel said to Joseph, behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and he will bring you
with it
again.
already. My goodness.
Come on.
So as you're reading this, you're like, okay, he's about to die. Oh, he doesn't yet. Oh, he's about to die. No, he doesn't yet.
He talked again.
And then he dies. And then he's still here.
And it's true.
It's
true. But there was a little redemptive thread for me with Jacob, since I keep dogging him, and I don't want people to be like, wow, Lori Wingaplex hates Jacob. I really, 48:15, Jacob says, he's blessing Joseph right before he doesn't die. He says, the God before whom my father Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel has redeemed me from all evil. Like he starts off the blessing that way. And I did really think that it wasn't evidence of just the testimony of God's grace. It was the God of his fathers.
Yeah.
He knows he didn't earn it. But God had been his shepherd, and that struck me so much that I researched it a little bit, and that is the first reference in the Bible to God being anyone's shepherd.
That's cool.
Which I thought was just kind of a cool tidbit. But I did think that was maybe Jacob understanding that it was by the grace of God that he was where he was.
And I really believe this is happening. I think this was a near death. I've only heard this to be true about people as they get older and as they age. They start to see very clearly about things and life, and they take everything into account.
Yeah.
And as they start to take everything into account, and so I do believe this was I'm near death.
Yeah.
And I want to get right.
Clarity,
I want to get right with the Lord. And so for his wishy-washiness that we've talked about in his life, I really do think there's great clarity because he speaks with such clarity when he's doling out these blessings, that we're about to see. Like he is very sharp for a guy who's about to die. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So that would be my thing, is that I think it's I think it really is a heart change that's taking place kind of before our eyes here in this section of Scripture. And so here we go. Chapter 49. He doles out all these blessings. It's really, really interesting because there's a couple different literary things happening here, Laura. I think we talked about this too, but it's prophecy. And it's poetry. So both things are happening. As you notice in your scriptures, when you see sort of these different indentations and such, you're going to notice that it's a different style of writing. And so as Jacob, again, like just very dialed in to what he's about to say. And just a note, and you guys kind of jump in with this, but these weren't, when we think of prophecy, like for example, Brad on Sunday morning, prophesies. If you act this way, this will happen, okay? Or this won't happen.
Right.
And so what's happening here with Jacob as he's going through kind of past, present, future, here's your character and your disposition, here's what you've done, here's what you're doing, and here's where that's going to lead you. Yeah. And that's kind of what's happening as he doles these out to his children. Does that sound about accurate to y'all?
Yeah, I think so. And just even the idea of prophecy and poetry, I mean, if you read through the prophets, most of the prophetic writing is written in a poetic form, which makes it even harder to understand because it isn't just a narrative thing. Now, there might be that squeezed in between, but most of the passages in Isaiah or Jeremiah or whatever that are prophetic, they are in poetry form, right?
Yes, poetic and that makes sense because if it is, so there's two kinds of prophecy, right? There's forth-telling, which is telling forth the future, and there's, forth-telling, which is saying, thus saith the Lord. Yeah. Just what Brad does on Sunday. And then there's foretelling, which is telling something that is going to happen in the future. A lot of those passages from the prophets are foretelling, but some of them are forth-telling. And when it's telling the future, they don't know the future, so they have to use poetic language. It's going to be like this. Yeah, right. It's going to be like that. And so that's why a lot of the foretelling prophecy is also poetry, because we don't have words for it because it's in the future, and so we just have to use poetic, metaphorical kind of language.
Yeah. Like one of the examples is at the end, Benjamin, like his last one is a ravenous wolf
Right.
in the morning devouring. Well, there's signs of that the tribe is like that in like Judges. But there was another one somewhere else, and I didn't write down the reference, where the tribe wasn't that way. You know, so like to your point, like it's sort of some of it doesn't come to pass, some of it does come to pass, but both things come to pass.
Yeah,
it's just
it's
interesting.
poetic language.
Yeah. No, it's good. Some fascinating ones that, obviously Reuben was the firstborn and he was stripped of his birthright because in Genesis 35, he sleeps with Jacob's concubine, which was him trying to basically then I think what I read was, if you slept with the ruler's concubine, then you get to be the ruler.
Yeah.
You get to usurp the ruler, and that was his attempt at some political power there. But basically, there you kind of have. You call them unstable as water. I mean, some real harsh language
Wow,
about
I love
your
that,
son.
though.
Yeah,
Unstable as water.
Yeah.
Like, what's more not dependable than trying to get your footing on water?
Right.
So good.
Yeah. And then Simeon and Levi, fascinating story in Genesis chapter 34, where they trick Shechemites and kill them.
Yeah.
Kill them all.
Well, at the defense of their sister who
Yes.
was raped.
Yeah.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
they took it too far. They didn't allow God to take that vengeance.
And again, it's one of those things that Brad mentioned in that same talk, I believe, was just they used a covenant sign as a means of punishment.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, the sign of circumcision, which for the covenant people, that's how they literally disabled an entire town and then killed them.
Yeah. That's insane.
It's blasphemous almost,
So taking
That's an abomination.
Right.
taking what both of you said and kind of build on top of it, it says, and in their willfulness, they hamstrung oxen.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is that? Like, I was like, but it basically was oxen were a sign of peace.
Right.
And so they, in their senseless violence, they went too far.
They went too far.
Kind of your point.
They
And
cut
so-
off their nose to spite their face. That's what my grandma would say. Like they
Okay.
actually injured themselves
Yeah.
thinking that they were
Yeah.
Doing the Lord's work.
doing the Lord's work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In cast of characters, we've done that twice at our church. Has Brad ever done Judah? I would be fascinated for him to do one on Judah, because from where he started to where he ends up and hear the blessing. I mean, the name Judah means to praise, but he gets to be the forefather of the Messiah. And like, that's so cool, And I love that for like the way this unfolded for us around the round table. We almost skipped 38, then we did 38, and then we kind of get to have the reward from it. We saw his confession, his repentance before Joseph, and now the blessing that gets poured out
It
to
is
him.
really a stunning legacy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
from where Judah
started,
started,
yeah.
for sure. I mean, from what he did to then becoming like a pledge of safety. I love kind of that concept of he was going to be the pledge of safety for Benjamin. Remember, that's how he got his dad to convince him to let him go. He was like, I will sacrifice my life for his.
Yeah.
Like, hello,
Beautiful
Messianic
snapshot.
language,
I know.
Messianic language. I'm going to I'm going to become your pledge of safety.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, that's good. And then, we're going to skip over obviously some, but for Joseph, he gets fruitful in abundance. I just find it interesting that he wasn't, Judah was chosen to be the forefather of the Messiah and that Joseph wasn't, but he still has fruitfulness and abundance. There was some language about he was attacked and yet still remained steadfast in the Lord, which is good. So yeah, fascinating blessings. I would encourage you as you read through those blessings, there's so much cross-referencing to do. Go back and read these sons' stories prior to 37 through 50. Like we covered 37 through 50, but there was a life before Joseph and Joseph's story.
And there's a lot of fast forwarding to do as well.
Exactly. I mean, even Ephraim, that tribe ends up becoming prideful and end up going apostate. You can look up Judges 8, Judges 12, and then Hosea 4 to kind of read what happens to Ephraim. And so their eventual blessing wasn't as good as it could have been because they end up going apostate, which is unfortunate.
They are in the nations to the north. I mean, Ephraim is in almost all of Isaiah. The northern tribes are just referred to as Ephraim.
Yeah. Right.
And they're talking about all of Israel. So anyway, lots of fascinating stuff. A lot of historical stuff here.
I think we pulled out some really cool nuggets, and I feel like we got through the highlights.
So we're not going to let the poor guy die in this episode?
No, he's not going to. He's not going to die
we're gonna drag that out one more week.
Guy. One more week.
because 50 starts with then Joseph fell in his father. I mean, like 50.
Yeah.
I promise.
It's coming next week.
It is going to
Next week.
happen, but you got to wait.
Real quick, is there anything, we talked about some applications, some things that are in here, but as you look at Jacob coming to Joseph, Jacob's transformation, you think about the blessings he doles out, you think about sort of the transformation in Judah, Joseph's provision, his steadfastness. What do you guys, any takeaways for people as we kind of wrap this episode up?
Most of the takeaways are going to happen next week. So
Yeah. Don't want to spoil it.
back.
Don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, I don't really have anything this week that we haven't already talked about in passing.
No, that's good. I think a fun study, like it's not necessarily like an application takeaway, but I would encourage y'all to go through chapter 49, look at those blessings, look at the life of those, and then do a compare and contrast of the life of Joseph and the life of Jacob, and just sort of kind of see the way in which, and decide, it's obviously you know the answer to this, but decide who you want to be. I think a lot of us can have the victim mentality, like woe is me. It's all about the Jacob mentality or the Joseph mentality, which is I'm going to remain faithful. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm going to trust that God is good and He's gracious, and I'm just going to stay faithful through it all.
Yeah,
so
it's good.
Anyway, it's good. Okay, uno más.
Yep.
All right.
Next week.
Thanks.